He was warned. By his brother. By his sister. By her own sons. Everyone told him not to marry her. And on October 13, 2011, at 4:40 in the morning, Greg Williams learned they were right. But by then it was too late. There's a particular kind of darkness that settles over a wealthy neighborhood before the sun comes up. Everything looks safe. Everything looks normal. The gates are locked. The lawns are perfectly trimmed. The driveways hold expensive cars. From the outside, nothing is wrong. But at 4:40 in the morning on October 13, 2011, a 911 call shattered that silence in Keller, Texas. A woman's voice, breathless, broken. She told the dispatcher that someone had broken into their home, that her husband had been shot, that the intruder might still be in the house. Within minutes, police arrived at the scene. What they found was Greg Williams, 40 years old, successful, disciplined, a devoted father, dead in his own bed, a single gunshot wound to his right temple. There were no signs of a break-in. Nothing had been stolen. $20,000 sat completely untouched in a safe. And the only adult in that house who claimed to know what happened was Greg's wife, Michelle. This is her story. And his. To understand October 13, 2011, you have to go back much further. Before the gated community. Before the matching Mercedes-Benz cars. Before the $850,000 life insurance policy. There was a girl who became a mother at 17. A young woman whose world was one of instability, survival, and constant reinvention. Over the course of a decade, Michelle had 3 children with 2 different men. She married twice. She divorced twice. She would later claim that both marriages ended because her husbands had been unfaithful. In one case, she alleged with a 17-year-old dental hygienist. But according to her own son, Andrew, the narrative wasn't so simple. Andrew testified that Michelle herself had also been unfaithful across those relationships. Her eldest son, Lee, described growing up in that household as chaotic, in ways that went well beyond ordinary family difficulty. Michelle worked in adult entertainment clubs, and she would bring her children along with her into those environments. Lee and Andrew both suspected, though they could never fully confirm, that their mother may have also engaged in other types of work. What was undeniable was that the children were shaped by the instability that surrounded them, and in many ways damaged by it. This was the foundation Michelle Williams built her life on, and its essential context for everything that followed. In 2007, some reports say 2008, Michelle met Gregory Williams at an adult social club. Greg's brother, Michael, who was present that night, later recalled that Michelle made an impression in the most explicit way possible. She was not hard to notice, and Greg, by all accounts, was completely captivated. Greg Williams was a self-made man in the truest sense of the phrase. A computer engineer and entrepreneur, he had built a company from the ground up into a business that reportedly generated around $500,000 a year. Outside of work, he was a bodybuilder and martial artist. Structured, disciplined, intensely capable. He was also the devoted father of a young daughter from a previous relationship. A man who, according to those who knew him best, took pride in every part of the life he had built. In true crime, we often ask this question: what did the victim's family see in the person who would eventually be accused? In this case, the answer is clear. They saw Michelle Williams, and they were worried immediately. Greg's sister, Michelle Fletcher, was among the most vocal. She accused Michelle of using her sexuality as a weapon, alleging that Michelle had made a direct advance on her husband, Bryn, after asking him to help her in the attic of the family home. According to Fletcher, when Bryn climbed up there, he found Michelle in a compromising position, making her intentions unmistakable. Michelle's own sons, Lee and Andrew, both Army veterans, were equally skeptical of the relationship, though for different reasons. They saw Greg as arrogant and difficult. What none of them could have predicted was how much worse the alternative would be. Despite every warning, Greg moved forward. They married within months. He purchased a home in a gated community in Keller, Texas. He bought them matching Mercedes-Benz cars as an anniversary gift. He provided, by every measure, the life Michelle had always wanted. They had a daughter together, a little girl named Michaela. From the outside, it looked like a fairy tale. From the inside, it was something else entirely. Comment below if you can already see the red flags. The marriage was troubled almost from the beginning. Michelle and Greg's older daughter had a deeply strained relationship. Michelle accused the young woman of tampering with her morning coffee, putting substances in it, a charge that Greg, despite his daughter's repeated denials, took seriously enough to send her to rehabilitation. It was one of the first signs that Greg's loyalty, once anchored, could be turned against the very people who needed his protection most. Financially, the picture grew darker over time. Greg worked long hours and earned well. But Michelle, according to reporting by journalists and subsequent court coverage, was spending at a pace that no income could sustain. In 2011, Greg purchased a frozen yogurt shop called Blueberries. He paid $110,000 for it, partly out of generosity, partly family members believed, to give Michelle something structured to do, something to focus on. She showed little interest in actually running it. Employees and people close to the family described her treating the cash register like a personal ATM, pulling cash out without accounting for it, without tracking it, continuing her pattern of unchecked spending. By the fall of 2011, the couple's joint bank account held only around $30,000. They were in the process of planning to purchase a new home, complete with a pool for Michaela. But the numbers were not adding up. In any divorce, Greg's assets would have been protected to a significant degree. The business he had built, the wealth he had accumulated over years of hard work. It would not simply transfer to Michelle. But there was a life insurance policy, $850,000. And Michelle Williams was the named beneficiary. According to prosecutors, the math was simple. And Michelle had always been good at math. At 4:40 in the morning on October 13, 2011, Michelle dialed 911. Her voice was tight, breathless, fractured. She told the dispatcher that someone had broken into their home, that Greg had been shot, that the shooter might still be inside. Michaela, their 4-year-old daughter, was asleep upstairs. Police arrived within minutes and immediately swept the house. No intruder. No sign of forced entry anywhere in the home. No broken glass. No splintered door frame. No disturbed lock. Nothing. When officers climbed the stairs to the master bedroom, they found Greg Williams in bed, lifeless. A gunshot wound to his right temple. A pool of blood surrounded him on the bed. The scene told an immediate story, but it was not the story Michelle was telling. Crime scene investigators began cataloging what they found. A .45 caliber handgun, Greg's own weapon, the one he typically kept on his nightstand for protection. It had been discovered near the back door. A wrench was beside it, plastic tubs containing cleaning wipes, and then the most significant discovery of all. The entire house had been wiped down. Every surface. No fingerprints. No DNA. Not even from the people who lived there. Think about that for a second. Someone had gone through that entire house and wiped down every single surface. Michelle gave her first statement to the responding officers. She said she had been asleep on the couch with Michaela. She heard a noise. She went to check on Greg. She saw a dark-clothed figure in the bedroom. She felt a sharp pain in her head and blacked out. Someone had hit her. When she came to, Greg was dead. Detectives took her in for formal questioning at the station. They told her plainly. Her story did not align with what the evidence was showing them. She agreed to a gunshot residue test. Came back negative. They kept pressing her, asking questions, poking holes in her story. After 5 hours, Michelle changed her story completely. Greg had taken his own life. She had witnessed it. And in the aftermath, in a panic, desperate to protect Michaela from the truth, she had staged the entire scene. She had wiped the gun clean. She had cleaned Greg's hands. She had struck herself in the face with the wrench to simulate an attack wound, to make it look like someone had hit her. She had moved the weapon outside and arranged the scene to look like a burglary gone wrong. She had even told Greg's grieving family the intruder story after the fact. She had done it all, she said, for her daughter, to protect Michaela from knowing her father had taken his own life. Forensic analysis destroyed that theory with considerable force. The medical examiner, a professional with nearly 40 years of experience, testified that in all his years of practice, he had never encountered a case where the weapon was fired from the distance indicated by the evidence in this case. The gun had been discharged from somewhere between 6 and 24 inches away from Greg's head. That is not how people harm themselves. When someone takes their own life with a gun, the weapon is pressed against the skin. Contact wound. Point blank. This was not that. The trajectory of the round was direct, straight through, rather than angled, which further contradicted the body mechanics of such an act. The stippling marks on the right side of Greg's face confirmed the distance. Gunpowder had traveled through the air before impact, ruling out a contact wound entirely. The shell casing had landed in a position that would have been physically impossible if Greg had been the one holding the gun. A forensic firearm examiner traced the spent cartridge back to Greg's own .45 caliber pistol, the weapon he kept by the bed for protection. Everything pointed to a shooter who was standing near Greg while he lay in that bed. Someone he trusted enough to let that close. Someone who could stand there, aim a gun at his head, and pull the trigger. The investigation had its challenges. The Keller Police Department was not routinely experienced with homicide scenes. This was a wealthy, safe suburb, not a place where people got shot in their own beds. And when Greg's body was transported to the medical examiner's office, it had been wrapped in his bed sheets. A handling decision that created legitimate cross-examination concerns about potential evidence contamination. But the core forensic evidence, built from multiple independent analyses, held strong. In January 2012, 3 months after Greg's death, Michelle Williams was arrested and formally charged. What followed Michelle's arrest was a legal saga that at several points seemed almost designed to test the limits of how far one person could push a system before it pushed back. Facing a potential sentence of 50 to 100 years, Michelle accepted a plea arrangement. She would plead guilty to evidence tampering and a Texas charge called deadly conduct, essentially wielding a weapon irresponsibly. Under the deal, she faced 2 to 20 years. Given the timeline, she could have been released around the time Michaela turned 18. She would still be there for her daughter. That, reportedly, was the calculation. While out on bail, Michelle had built what looked like a brand new life. She had begun a relationship with Gene, also reported as Gene Wallace, a personal trainer who was 12 years younger than her. He was, in one of the stranger details of this case, the former best friend of her son, Lee. When Lee discovered the relationship, he was, by all accounts, furious, feeling doubly betrayed by both his mother and his closest friend. Michelle and Gene opened a gym together. She began going by a new name, Shell, a fresh identity, clean start. During one of her court hearings, Michelle informed the judge that she was pregnant with twins. A high-risk pregnancy, she said, that required special consideration. She produced sonogram images to prove it. The prosecution was skeptical. The judge was skeptical. And people who had known Michelle for years were not surprised at all. Because fabricating pregnancies and fabricating losses was something she had reportedly done before, as a tool for sympathy and manipulation. By the time of trial, there was no pregnancy, no twins, no medical records to support any of it. But the moment that truly unraveled everything was an interview. Michelle agreed to sit down with CBS's 48 Hours while awaiting sentencing. And on camera, in front of millions of viewers, she threw out the story she had confessed to police. She was back to the beginning. A mysterious dark-clad intruder had broken in and ended Greg's life. It wasn't her. It had never been her. The judge saw the interview. The judge was not pleased. The plea agreement was immediately revoked. Michelle Williams would now stand trial for first-degree charges, with life in prison on the table. Comment if you're still here, because what comes next is absolutely unbelievable. The trial began in September 2014, nearly 3 years after Greg Williams died in his bed. By then, the outlines of the case were well known to the people of Keller, Texas. What the trial did was fill them in, detail by detail. The prosecution's theory was financial and coldly logical. Greg's careful accumulation of wealth had been systematically eroded by Michelle's spending. The couple could not make the down payment on the new home they were planning to buy. The account that should have held a successful entrepreneur's savings held only $30,000. A confrontation had broken out, prosecutors alleged, when Greg discovered the full extent of what had happened to his money. And in that moment, Michelle Williams, looking at a possible divorce, looking at the loss of everything she had leveraged his success to acquire, made a calculation. With Greg gone, there was an $850,000 life insurance policy. With Greg alive, there was a reckoning. The forensic testimony reinforced what the physical evidence had always suggested. The medical examiner was clear and emphatic. The wound was not self-inflicted. The distance, the trajectory, the position of the shell casing, none of it was consistent with what Michelle had claimed. Greg's mother took the witness stand. She described a son who was tired from long hours of work but genuinely happy. A man who talked with excitement about the house he and Michelle were going to buy. A man who loved being a father to both his daughters. There was nothing, she said, that would have led Greg to take his own life. Nothing. And then came Andrew, Michelle's younger son. A man who had spent his entire childhood watching his mother operate. Watching her manipulate. Watching her lie. Watching her reinvent herself over and over again. Andrew took the witness stand against his own mother. He testified that approximately 1 month after Greg's death, Michelle had approached him with a plan. She wanted him to find some friends, buy a large sweater, take it out to the woods, and fire a pistol into it multiple times, covering it in gunshot residue. Then she wanted them to break into the car belonging to Greg's ex-wife, Kathy, plant the sweater inside, and call the police from a payphone to report it stolen. The police would find the sweater in Kathy's car. The sweater would be covered in gunshot residue. Kathy would become a suspect. The case would shift away from Michelle. Andrew didn't believe she was serious at first, but she kept asking. She kept pushing. She kept refining the plan. And then the plan shifted entirely. Michelle began asking Andrew a different question. Did he think his brother Lee might have been responsible for Greg's death? She was, Andrew believed, preparing to sacrifice her own eldest son, the boy who had grown up watching her, to save herself. Let that sink in for a moment. A mother, facing a potential life sentence, willing to frame her own son for a crime she allegedly committed. The prosecution called her calculated and cold-blooded. In closing arguments, they laid out a clear timeline. Clear motive, clear evidence. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. When they came back, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty. First-degree charges and tampering with physical evidence. The sentence came down swiftly. 60 years for the primary charge. 10 years for the tampering. To run concurrently. Under Texas law, Michelle Williams would not be eligible for parole for 30 years, at which point she would be 74 years old. Michaela, the little girl who had been asleep in that house while her father was taken from her, was placed with family friends. She would be a grown woman with a life of her own before her mother could walk free. But the story of Michelle Williams does not end with the verdict. Because 10 months before Greg Williams died, another man died. And the circumstances surrounding his death have never been fully resolved. Bryn Fletcher was Greg's brother-in-law, married to Greg's sister, Michelle Fletcher. He worked as a truck driver. And on the day he died, he was driving a route for Greg's company, following directions that had been arranged by Michelle Williams. About 45 minutes into his drive, he pulled over to the side of Highway 34 near Ennis, Texas. When police responded to a call about an abandoned truck on the highway, they found Bryn inside the vehicle. He had been shot once in the head. The Ellis County Sheriff's Office ruled his death as self-inflicted. Case closed. Michelle Fletcher, Bryn's wife, has never accepted that ruling. She believes Michelle Williams is responsible for her husband's death, and she believes the motive traces back to what happened in that attic. The allegation that Michelle had attempted to seduce Bryn, and that Bryn had refused her, Fletcher believes Bryn was taken from her before he could become a problem for Michelle, before he could tell Greg what his wife had done. No charges were ever filed in Bryn's death. Police have indicated they have no plans to reopen the investigation. The CBS program 48 Hours, which covered the case extensively, noted that it may never be known with certainty whether Michelle Williams was involved in Bryn Fletcher's death. His death remains officially classified as self-inflicted, and his widow carries a grief she believes has never truly been answered for. The case of Michelle Williams is not simply a story about greed. It's a study in a very specific and recognizable psychology, one that forensic professionals encounter regularly, and one that, in hindsight, was visible at nearly every stage of this story. What emerges from the full arc of the evidence is a profile consistent with what clinicians would describe as severe antisocial personality traits, likely compounded by narcissistic features. This doesn't mean a cartoonish monster. It means someone who has learned over a lifetime to read environments, to mirror what others need to see, and to construct whatever version of herself best serves her immediate interest. Michelle was not disorganized or impulsive. The cleaning of the crime scene, the staged intrusion, the self-inflicted wound, the shifting narratives, these are not the actions of panic. They reflect a mind that was calculating under pressure, strategic, adaptive. Her early life provides critical context. Growing up with chronic instability, financial uncertainty, an absent structure of care, exposure to adult environments that children should never be in. This often produces individuals who become hyper-attuned to opportunity and threat. The ability to read rooms, to identify what people want, to present oneself accordingly. These are survival mechanisms. In healthy environments with proper support and intervention, they soften over time. For some people, they become the permanent operating system. Michelle Williams appears to have been one of those people. What's particularly striking is the pattern of escalation. First marriages, first divorces, first accusations of infidelity, then entry into more transactional environments, then a strategic marriage to a wealthy man whose entire family warned him against her, then financial exploitation on a massive scale, then, if the jury was correct, taking a life, and then immediately afterward, a new name, a new partner, a new business, completely new life, a reset. This is not the behavior of someone who experiences remorse or horror at what they've done. It's the behavior of someone who experiences consequences as obstacles to be managed and moved past. The false pregnancy claims deserve specific examination. Fabricating a pregnancy, or in this case multiple pregnancies, to generate sympathy, delay legal proceedings, or manipulate emotional responses requires something very specific. A sustained willingness to deceive, a confidence that the deception will succeed, and a complete absence of empathy for the people being misled. Presenting fabricated sonogram images to a sitting judge represents an almost breathtaking escalation of that pattern. It suggests not recklessness, but a deep-seated belief in her own ability to outmaneuver any system she encountered. That belief, it turned out, had a limit. The most psychologically revealing moment of this entire case may be Andrew's testimony. A mother facing a potential life sentence, who reportedly discussed framing her own son for a crime. That willingness to sacrifice the people most bound to her by blood and history suggests a profound disconnection from what psychologists call attachment. The fundamental human capacity to value others for who they are rather than for what they provide. Whether we frame it clinically as antisocial personality disorder, as malignant narcissism, or simply as the extreme end of a spectrum that begins with ordinary self-interest, what it describes is a person for whom other human beings are ultimately instruments. They are useful, or they are obstacles. And when they are obstacles, they are expendable. Greg Williams, by contrast, appears to have been someone who wanted genuinely and deeply to believe the best of people. Every warning came early. His brother saw it. His sister saw it. His family saw it. His stepdaughter saw it. And eventually even Michelle's own sons tried to tell him. He chose not to hear it. That's not foolishness. That's human nature. We build our understanding of people around what we want them to be. not what they actually are. What made Greg's vulnerability fatal was a specific combination: his resources, his trusting nature, and the exceptional skill of the woman who had chosen him. In the end, this case is a study in the ordinary devastation that one person can cause when they move through the world without conscience. Not as a stranger to be feared on the street, but as a neighbor, a wife, a mother, a business owner, someone who drove a Mercedes and smiled at birthday parties and seemed, by every external measure, to have made it. The horror of the Michelle Williams case is not in its strangeness. It's in its familiarity, in how long it took, in how many people saw it, and in how one man didn't. Comment below if this case affected you the way it affected me. Let me know what part shocked you most. Here is the complete timeline of the Michelle Williams case. From the beginning of a troubled life to a courtroom in Tarrant County, Texas. True crime is often consumed in fragments, pieces here and there. This is the full picture. In order: late 1980s to 1990s. Michelle becomes a mother at 17 years old. Over the following decade, 3 children with 2 different men, 2 marriages, 2 divorces. She works in adult entertainment clubs. Her sons grow up in an environment they later describe as chaotic and unstable. There are allegations of mutual infidelity in both marriages. 2007 to 2008. Michelle meets Greg Williams at an adult social club. Despite vocal opposition from both families, including a direct seduction allegation from Greg's sister involving her husband, Michelle and Greg marry within months. Greg purchases a home in a gated community in Keller, Texas. He provides Michelle with a comfortable, affluent lifestyle, including matching Mercedes-Benz cars. 2007 to 2011. The marriage faces ongoing tensions from the very beginning. A strained relationship develops between Michelle and Greg's older daughter. A disputed allegation leads Greg to send his daughter to rehabilitation. Michelle's financial behavior becomes increasingly unchecked. In 2011, Greg purchases Blueberries, a frozen yogurt shop, for $110,000. Partly out of generosity, partly to give Michelle something structured to do. She shows little interest in running it properly. Instead, she treats the cash register as a personal fund, taking money without accounting for it. Early 2011. Bryn Fletcher, Greg's brother-in-law and a truck driver for Greg's company, is found deceased in his vehicle on Highway 34 near Ennis, Texas. A single gunshot wound to the head. His route that day had been assigned by Michelle Williams. The Ellis County Sheriff's Office rules the incident as self-inflicted. No charges are filed. His widow, Michelle Fletcher, does not accept this ruling and believes Michelle Williams is responsible. October 13, 2011. 4:40 a.m., Michelle calls 911. She reports an intruder and a shooting. Police arrive to find no forced entry, nothing stolen, $20,000 untouched in the safe. Greg Williams is found deceased in his bed with a gunshot wound to his right temple. The entire house has been wiped clean of all fingerprints and DNA. October 13, 2011. Interrogation. Michelle gives 2 completely contradictory accounts within 5 hours. First, she claims a dark-clothed intruder broke in and shot Greg. Then, she claims Greg took his own life and she staged the scene to protect their daughter. Gunshot residue test comes back negative. She is initially charged with evidence tampering and released on bail. Late 2011. Michelle does not attend Greg's funeral. She sells Blueberries for $45,000. Less than half what Greg paid for it. She sells Greg's business for $8,000 per month. His family believes she is liquidating his legacy as quickly as possible. She begins a relationship with Gene Wallace, a personal trainer 12 years her junior, and her son Lee's former best friend. They open a gym together. She adopts the name Shell, a fresh identity. January 2012. 3 months after Greg's death, Michelle is arrested and formally charged. The case faces early procedural challenges related to how Greg's body was handled at the crime scene. 2012 to 2014. Plea deal negotiations take place. Michelle claims to be pregnant with twins. She presents sonogram images in court. No medical records ever surface to support this claim. At the time of trial, she is visibly not pregnant. While awaiting sentencing, she gives a televised interview on CBS's 48 Hours. She reverses her story once more, returns to the intruder narrative. The judge sees the interview and is not pleased. The plea agreement is immediately revoked. September 2014. Trial begins. The prosecution argues financial motive. Only $30,000 remains in the joint account. But there's an $850,000 life insurance policy with Michelle as beneficiary. They argue a confrontation happened over money. Forensic testimony rules out self-infliction based on shot distance, trajectory, and shell casing position. The medical examiner testifies he has never seen such a case in 40 years of practice. Greg's mother testifies that her son was happy and excited about the future. Andrew, Michelle's own son, testifies that she asked him to plant gunshot residue evidence on a sweater in Greg's ex-wife's car to frame her. He also testifies she later suggested framing his brother Lee for the crime. September 2014. Verdict. After 7 hours of deliberation, the jury finds Michelle Williams guilty of first-degree charges and evidence tampering. She is sentenced to 60 years in prison with a 10-year concurrent sentence for tampering. She will be eligible for parole after 30 years, at which point she will be 74 years old. Present day. The conviction stands. Appeals have not overturned the verdict. Michelle Williams remains in prison. Bryn Fletcher's death remains officially classified as self-inflicted. His widow, Michelle Fletcher, continues to believe otherwise. No investigation has been reopened into his death. The Michelle Williams case is one of those stories that stays with you, not because it's extraordinary, but because in some ways it isn't. The red flags were there from the very beginning. The people around Greg saw them clearly. His family warned him. Her own sons warned him. And yet here we are. Greg Williams was a successful, intelligent man. But he had a blind spot. He wanted to believe the best in people. He wanted to believe that Michelle could be the person she presented herself to be. And that belief cost him everything. If you found this documentary valuable, please hit that like button. Comment below with your thoughts on this case. What could Greg have done differently? Should the people around him have pushed harder? What do you think really happened to Bryn Fletcher? Let me know in the comments. And make sure you subscribe to Unsolved Hour and turn on those notifications so you don't miss our in-depth coverage of cases that deserve to be remembered. We release new cases every single week, because the truth, however long it takes, deserves to be told. These aren't just stories. They're real people, real families, real lives that were cut short. Greg Williams deserves to be remembered not just as a victim, but as a father who loved his daughters, as a brother who was loved by his family, as a man who built something from nothing. Thank you for watching. And remember, sometimes the most dangerous person in your life is the one who knows exactly what you want to hear.